Hello, everyone. This is my first live, so we're all going to learn this together. I see we have a few people in here. So we'll give people just a minute to come in, and I'd love to hear what you all did this afternoon. I actually spent the afternoon repairing fence. Can anybody top that? Let me know if you can comment in the chat so that I know that you'll be able to ask questions about the book as we get started. Can anybody leave me a little hello or something in the comments? Oh, thank you. Hello, Destiny. Shalom to you too. All right. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Heidi Cooper of Torah Family Living, and I am super excited about this book that we're going to be talking about tonight. This is the book, The Renewed Covenant, and the subtitle is Living Elohim's Law Within Us, and it's going to cover the concept that the New Testament is not some different thing than the Old Testament. It's all one big story, and this is going to help us study that through and understand it in Scripture. And I've got all my notes in my copy, and this has a different cover. If you have one that looks like this, I bet it's worth a fortune because there's only like 3 of these that actually got sent out. So if you have one of these, consider yourself special. All right. Can anybody else pop in the chat and let me know that you are ready to go, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right. If you have a copy of the book, I hope you have it with you so that you can maybe take notes in the margin, or you can share, once we get into this a little bit, you can share any notes that you already took. Let me know if you have actually been able to start reading through the book, those who are with us in the chat. Okay. And as you're doing that, I wanted to point out at the beginning of each of these Bible study guides, there is a page that says how to use this study guide. I wanted to specifically point out where the author says to stay engaged and open-minded. He says, approach this study prayerfully and with a teachable heart. The goal is not just to gather knowledge, but to allow the truth of Elohim's word to transform your understanding and actions. So that's how we want to come at this, not just to have academics, not just to have more knowledge, but to actually have a changed heart, to have better understanding, and as a result, to live differently. And I also hope that because of this topic of the renewed covenant, when we're having conversations with people who may be new to these concepts, we will be better equipped to explain these concepts to them. So I'm going to go ahead and flip in my book to chapter 1. I'm going to go ahead and go through chapter 1, and then next Monday evening, we will talk about chapter 2, so you can be ready. Okay, so we're talking about the new covenant as restoration and renewal. And I'm going to just try to prop this up here in front of me so I can see my notes. Okay, so the author, Greg Witter, he uses a lot of the concepts from the Paleo-Hebrew, which means the idea that each of the letters not only makes a sound, but has an individual meaning to it. And I think we're all at least somewhat familiar with that concept. Oh, we just had another one pop in. I'm glad that you could join us, even if you're sick. I hope you feel better. Okay, so the concept that each letter has a meaning, when you put all those together, then you get a fuller, richer meaning to the word, which makes me think of my kids used to watch on PBS Word World, where let's build a word. That's what Hebrew does. It actually builds words with the individual letters that have individual meanings. So the concept of this book being the renewed covenant, the biggest concept we need to start with is that word renewed, which in the Hebrew is kadash. And that's a ket, dalet, and a shin. And it means not just new, but renewed. We have dogs. They are going to probably try to join us every now and then. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so the idea, can we get her out, please? The idea that it's not a new covenant in the New Testament, it's a renewed covenant, meaning he's giving it more meaning. He's fulfilling. He's bringing more fulfillment to it. When we first started learning that Torah was still a thing about 18 years ago. Oh, your dog just barked back. About 18 years ago, when we were starting to learn these ideas of Torah, I know my mom was doing a study in that verse in Matthew where it says he came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. That to her, that word fulfill, when she started breaking that down, that was like the turning point for her, that she understood it was to fill it up with meaning. And that's going to be a foundational concept in this book as I was studying through, is the idea that it's not something old is done away with, something new takes its place, but that it's actually bringing in all the meaning, helping us to completely understand it. Okay. All right. So as we're going through, the other thing I wanted to point out is when I'm studying scripture, my absolute favorite thing to look for is cross references. Go ahead and tell me in the chat as we're talking, what you like to, what is your favorite things to look for? I know some of you may like to look up the Hebrew words or look in different translations. What do you really like to look for when you're studying scripture? For me, it's cross references. And I will, when I'm going through a passage, even where we're at Shabbat meetings, I'm like, and where was that quote from? Where does that tie to? Well, there's a lot of Hebrew words in this book, Destiny. Absolutely. So I loved looking at cross references, which we're also going to see a lot of. And that was actually my first note, is I noticed a really cool cross reference. Long day. And it was about the concept of the blood of the covenant. Now, I know many of us grew up in church and having communion and them saying, this is the blood of the new covenant. That concept is very much rooted in the Old Testament. And I just wanted to point that out to you. I'm not going to go through the whole chapter. I just want to point out some things that were just, wow, really exciting, and that I want to make sure that you see. So in Matthew, I'm going to go ahead and read it. In Matthew 26:28, Yeshua says, "For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins," which is what they often use in churches when they're giving communion. That is a quote from Exodus chapter 24, verse 8, when Moses is on Mount Sinai, and he says, "This is the blood of the covenant, which Yahuwah has made with you in accordance with all these words." So Yeshua was literally not creating some new religion. He was literally referencing Mount Sinai when the commands were given. And to me, that's just like, yeah, that's exciting stuff. And it ties it in that it's one complete story. And Yeshua was not bringing anything new per se. He was helping us to understand what was already in place. And again, in the workbook, he uses that term "fulfill" again, which is again so key to comprehending. It's filling it up with meaning. It's not doing away with it. It's filling it up. All right, let's see what else that jumped out at me. And as we're going through, be thinking about, if you've already been able to work through the first chapter, be sure to take a minute and comment and share anything that really jumped out at you or something new that you learned as well. Okay, so another thing that really jumped out at me, he was talking about that the animal sacrifices were a picture, but they had to be continually given, and they were not able to fully cover sin, whereas Yeshua's sacrifice was able to do the job completely. An animal couldn't do what Yeshua's blood did, especially since he also had the power to rise from the dead. And it was an interesting phrase that he said: these sacrifices pointed forward to a greater ultimate sacrifice. And in Hebrews, we see that picture. And let me see if I can find, it's in Hebrews chapter 10. which it gives the idea again that these animal sacrifices, they weren't able to completely take care of sin, the problem of sin, but they were a picture and a visual reminder. So let me see if I can find what I wanted to read to you. Okay, if you start at verse 1 in Hebrews chapter 10, it says, "For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come, instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near. Otherwise, would they not have ceased to be offered, since the worshippers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have any consciousness of sins? But in these sacrifices, there is a reminder of sins every year." And to me, we see this all through scripture. Tzitzis are an excellent example. They give us a visual, physical reminder of a lesson that Yah's trying to teach us. Every time we're fiddling with our tassels on our clothes, it's like Yah's fidget toy that tells us, hey, reminder here, keep my commandments, do what I want you to do. And the animal sacrifices, as you go through this book, he explains clearly that blood is imperative in the concept of a covenant. Welcome, Paula. I'm glad you're here. It's imperative. It has to be part of this concept of a covenant. And these animals were a very visual picture of the cost of sin. If you raise animals, I've thought about this often. We have sheep, goats, cows, chickens, ducks. And think about if you were in the time of, say, the tabernacle or the temple, and you did something that required a sacrifice, you had to literally go into your herd, you had to pick an animal, and you had to take it to the tabernacle and kill it. Now, if you had that in your mind every time you were tempted to do something wrong, do you think it might slow you down just a little bit if you knew it was going to cost you that animal that's out in your pasture? I think it would. And I think that because we aren't in a position to give sacrifices right now, we lose the visual picture of the cost of our sin. And so I think it's important when we're pondering this whole sacrificial system, number one, that we think about the cost of our sin in these terms, like someone has to die because I made this choice. And of course, we know as we go through this further, Yeshua had to die because I made this choice. And I think we would be wise to keep that in the front of our minds as we're going through our days. The animal sacrifices did that. We don't have that constant reminder, so we have to be thinking about it. We have to choose to be pondering that. Okay, so he went on to talk about forgiveness, and a lot of the forgiveness he was talking about has to do with shame. And again, that's another cost of sin, is that it produces shame in us. He was referring to, I was thinking about Adam and Eve. When they sinned that first time by eating the forbidden fruit, the result was shame, which caused them to want to hide. That was part of what sin brought. Whereas when we have forgiveness in Yeshua, through him actually taking care of our sin with a complete sacrifice of his own life, we don't need to hide in shame anymore. And I know sometimes we know that Yah forgives us, but we don't forgive ourselves. And that's something I think we all need to work on, is to make sure we realize that forgiveness means we don't have to be hiding in shame any longer. Okay, I'm going to go through my notes a little more. I have lots of notes. Lots of good stuff in here. Okay, John chapter 14. As we're pondering this whole idea that Yeshua did more than just the animal, what the animal sacrifices couldn't do. He was able to complete the job. And that's part of the renewed covenant. Not that he did something different. He was able to do it completely. All right, John chapter 14. Let's see. I wrote the reference. Let's see what I was going to talk about there. Okay. So the idea that not only can we learn to no longer live in shame, but also the idea that we can live in gratitude as a result. And in John 14:15, you all are familiar with this verse. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. So out of gratitude, we keep the commandments. We don't do it to be saved, because if an animal sacrifice couldn't do it, and it required Yeshua's death and resurrection, us keeping the commands is not going to save us. Why do we keep the commands? Because it pleases our Father. Because we're part of his family and we do what he tells us to do out of gratitude. If you love me, keep my commandments. And that is just such a beautiful picture. Welcome, Lori. I'm so glad you can make it. All right. So for those who have just popped in, I'm sharing the gems that jumped out at me from chapter 1 of the book, The Renewed Covenant. The idea that it's nothing new, it's just better. It's just fulfilled. It's just full of meaning. Okay, so another concept he was talking about as a result of Yeshua fulfilling, not doing away with, but fulfilling the covenant, is that we have received his grace. We can extend that grace to others. So we can first learn to not live in shame. We can learn to live in gratitude and keeping his commands because we are thankful for what he did. And then we can show grace to others. And I immediately thought about the man that Yeshua talked about in his parable, where he was forgiven this huge sum of money. And then he went out and a guy owed him $10 and he says, you pay it back right now. And when the man who forgave him found out, he says, that's it, we're done, and sent him to jail. Because if we have been forgiven, we are to extend that forgiveness to others. When we have been loved and shown grace, we are to extend that to others, rather than like that man in that parable who could not forgive $10 when he was forgiven like $1 million, So that came to mind as he was talking about extending grace to others. All right, just gonna keep going through my notes. Again, the concepts that I kept writing this down because I think it's imperative to remember that we don't keep commands because somehow that's going to make our good scale be better than our bad scale. It will never work. It will never work. We keep his commands because we are so grateful for what he has done for us. And I think I wrote that several times in my notes going through this chapter, because that should be our takeaway, our key. This is what I need to do, is out of gratitude, I'm going to do what the Father commands. Okay, so we're going to move into, he started talking about Melchizedek, and we see Melchizedek in scripture initially in Genesis. I did not write down a reference to be able to, Genesis chapter 14. So we first see him in Genesis 14. He is actually a big piece of understanding the covenant and how we see it unfolding throughout history. So he is an important first piece, and we meet him after the whole Sodom and Gomorrah incident, and Abraham's coming back, and he meets Melchizedek, which in the Hebrew is Melech Zadok. I want to make sure I say that right. Melech means king. Zadok means righteousness. So he is the king of righteousness. That's what his title means. And he came and brought bread and wine and was identified as the priest of the Most High. And the connection here being that there's a connection between the bread and the wine that Melchizedek, I'll just say it the way we're used to hearing it because my tongue's getting, there's a connection between the bread and the wine that he offered to Abraham and the bread and the wine that Yeshua shared with his disciples at the Last Supper. And again, cross references, so exciting. Okay, so I think that I'm going to let you go through this chapter on your own, but I think there is an awful lot that we can learn from this little conversation that he had with Abraham. And then we see him referenced later in scripture as well, in Hebrews particularly. Now, he is a picture of the priesthood that Yeshua is a high priest of. So there's these connections here that are explained in Hebrews. But I am just curious, and I'm going to be running this by the author, Greg. I'm going to be running by him. I'm going to be running by some other people that maybe studied it more. I'm wondering if this name, Melchizedek, is more than just a name, and is it a title? And I also want to know, because let me find the spot that I wanted to. He is described as, let me see if I can find it. I didn't highlight it good enough. Let me see if I can find it in Hebrews chapter 7, because the way he is described, I'm wondering if there's more to his identity than we are immediately led to believe. And if you all know anything, you go ahead and share, because my interest is seriously piqued as I was going through here, trying to comprehend what's going on. Hebrews chapter 7. Okay, so it's Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So Melchizedek he's got a priesthood that's higher than the Levitical priesthood. But there was something else that was said about him not being born. Now, of course, I can't find it. Cannot find it when I want to share it with you. Anyway, we're going to have to work on this week. The priesthood of the Most High, not of the Levitical priesthood. Yes. So there's more here that I think we need to work on this week. So I'm going to assign this to all of you. I want you to dig a little more on Melchizedek, because there's a lot here I think that we can learn from. So go ahead and keep seeing how many references, how is he described, and what can we learn from that. There we go. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on from there, because I had all these thoughts, and of course I didn't write them down clear enough, but I think we can all work on this together and learn more about that picture. It's super important, and we want to make sure we're understanding that. Okay, so here's another thing I wanted to point out. Abraham's encounter with Melchizedek marked a moment of faith and trust in Elohim's promises. Similarly, believers are called to live in faith, trusting in the sufficiency of Yeshua's priesthood and walking in obedience to Elohim's word. That I circled that word sufficiency. That really jumped out at me, that unlike I'm taking a goat to be sacrificed, which was an important element, it was an important lesson, an important picture, it was not eternally sufficient, whereas Yeshua was. And we want to keep that in our minds, that as we are exercising faith, that faith is partly the idea that what Yeshua did was sufficient. That word sufficient, I think that's an important and powerful word for us to remember. Okay. And of course, as we're talking about Melchizedek and Yeshua, it reminds us that we are supposed to be a kingdom of priests and kings. So we are to be following in his footsteps in that way. We need to learn. We need to learn what it means to live in a kingdom. We need to learn what it means. What did the priests do? What was their role? How can we live that out now? We need to learn more about that than what we currently know. I know that's not something I have extensively studied, but I'm seeing that if we're supposed to be a kingdom of priests and kings, we need to learn how to do that. So that's something I think we need to look into more. And as we're approaching Passover in a very short time, this idea of the bread and the wine and how this all ties together with Melchizedek and Abraham, I think as we're approaching Passover, it's important for us to look at this even more, because when we do the Passover Seder, we have bread, it's unleavened. We have wine for the cups in the Seder, and I think it'd be a good thing to explore how this all ties together. Is this now or in the kingdom to come? See, I have questions. If you thought I was going to give you all the answers tonight, you are mistaken, because I am learning too. So yes, we need to explore this. We need to learn more, and I bet you there's probably some answers in the book if we keep going. But I have worked through chapter 1. I have not been going ahead so that we can all learn together. But yes, as we approach Passover, I encourage you to explore this idea of the bread and the wine, what it symbolizes, what it means for us, and how we need to live it out. Like I said, especially as we approach Passover. Okay, so let me see here if there was anything else I wanted to point out. Make sure that you take advantage of the he has questions at the end of the chapter, and I encourage you to actually go through those, and then he does have answers, so you can make sure you're on the right track. Okay, so he then goes through the Kadesh covenant again and explains, kind of summarized, what all of that means. And excuse me, he gives again this key symbols such as the bread and the wine. These are things that I think are easy to overlook when we're just reading through Torah portions, reading through passages. So I want to encourage you to slow down and start looking for some of these symbols, like the bread and the wine. And when bread and wine are brought up, is there a connection? They're usually, the scripture tends to work that way, that there's going to be connections, there's going to be cross references, so we want to look for those. Okay, I think that was all that I had. Nope. Oh my goodness, I've got another one. Told you I took a lot of notes. Okay, he was talking about, he was going through the Paleo Hebrew, and if you're more curious about the Paleo Hebrew, just a side note, I believe it's Jeff Brenner who has a book that explains a lot about the early Paleo and the meanings, and if you want to explore that more. So he was talking about the word Benner. Thank you. Can never remember how to say that one. The word Elohim. And he broke it all down, and it's all in the book, so I will let you explore that further. But summarizing, it means Elohim reveals himself as the strong, guiding leader who brings order out of chaos through divine action. And that, to me, was such a powerful picture, because Satan likes to mimic that by creating chaos to supposedly bring order from it. So he's trying to mimic that idea of bringing order out of chaos that Yah does perfectly. And he tries to create the chaos first, so then he can create the order. So it was just kind of an interesting little thought that came to me. Yes, Frank Seekins is another one that brings a lot of the I've learned a lot from his books as well. And what was the other one mentioned? The Unexpected Cosmology. Do you have an author for that? That is a title I'm not familiar with, because I'm sure other people would like to be able to look that up as well. Yeah, the Paleo, I think there's a lot to learn there, but yeah, I just can't help but think about that little kids show where they were building words, because that's what Hebrew does. It builds words. Okay. There we go. I think I made it to the end of chapter 1. The Messianic Aleph Tav scriptures. Okay. That also references the Paleo then, I would assume. Okay. All right. Now, did anybody, Pamela Glasgow. Okay. So if anyone was interested in that book, The Unexpected Cosmology, the author was Pamela Glassglow. Okay, so it's Jeff Benner, Frank Seekins, and Pamela Glassglow. Okay, thank you. Before we call it a night, does anyone have who has had a chance to go through? Did anyone have any questions? I may or may not have an answer, but I happen to know the author of the book, and I can ask. So if anyone had some questions they wanted to pop in the comments. Okay. Oh, we have some more coming in. Okay. As you're thinking of any questions you might have, let me bring it up here. This is the book that we are going through. Yeah. The Renewed Covenant. This is what the cover looks like. Okay. All right. So we'll be going through next week. We'll be going through chapter 2. And the chapters are not super long. So I know some of you are still waiting for your books. I am printing them as fast as I can. I appreciate you ordering them. So we'll get those to you as quickly as we can. If you're able to, though, try to get through chapter 2 before next Monday evening, and we'll go through chapter 2 then. And if you could be taking notes or highlighting or anything that pops out at you as you go through it, so that you can share with us and we can work through it together. So I think that was everything. Yes, I think it was. Okay, so we will call it a night for this week, and we will see you again next Monday evening at 7 p.m. All right, and if you do not yet have a copy of the book and would like one, there is a link in the description when this goes back on YouTube, and I'm putting one in the chat right now too. Okay. All right. I will see you all next time. Thank you for joining me.